Welcome, everyone. Delighted to have this conversation with our panel and with you, our audience. Our discussion, of course, as Shani said, comes at an ominous time. We're 2 weeks away from one of the most significant elections in the United States, and France, on the other hand, has turned around or turned the corner since July, after the dissolution of the National Assembly, and is facing now a new landscape as far as the political parties in France are concerned. We count on journalists in these turbulent times to interpret the world and to make sense of these changing political landscapes. And journalists also have a very important function to play in providing accurate information and providing a range of ideas that empower citizens, ourselves, to make judicious choices and also to take a constructive role in the life of our democracy. But when disinformation comes in, this makes the job of journalists and people who are professionals in the world of media very difficult. How do we cope with the challenges of disinformation? This is what our panel will try and elucidate for us today. Louis Dreyfus, I'd like to turn to you first. We all have in mind egregious examples of disinformation from Pizzagate in the United States to issues about COVID vaccines and the Haitian community in Springfield. But disinformation has deep historical roots. One example that I'd just like to start with is in the 1830s in New York. New Yorkers were faced with the Great Moon Hoax. Some of you might have heard of this, but the New York Sun at the time published a series of articles that claimed to have discovered new life forms on the moon, and drawings of these life forms, which included all sorts of different creatures with wings, Batmen and other funny creatures were published, and apparently about 90% of New Yorkers believed the hoax. What's different with disinformation today? I mean, that's my question to you, Louis Dreyfus. Why is what we're witnessing today different? Is it about the power of the spread of information, which goes much faster, much quicker, and much deeper? Or is it about something else? Is it also about our political culture?
First, thank you for the invitation. But I would say both. First, we have reached in France, but more globally in the Western world, a level of distrust exceptional. Every institution, a political institution, economic institution, but also institution in terms of journalism, are contested by a major part of the population. And at the same time, with the social networks, it is more, it's easier and easier to spread the fake news. All of the new generation, and that's probably one of the big change with the 19th century that you were quoting. It's the new generation are on the mobile. They are reading social networks. They are having access to a diverse source of information that are not journalistic source of information. And in this world, for a legacy media like Le Monde, it is difficult to promote its quality of journalism when you are an institution at a time when institutions are not trusted anymore. Mm-hmm. So that's very different. it's the issue is much bigger since we don't know how to stop this diffusion of fake news, and at the same time, because we are an institution for a major part of the population, uh, we are not trustable anymore. And I was talking to two of the students earlier today, and they were asking me what are the main challenges. Le Monde is remarkable in addressing the people who trust and agree with us. We are double the number of paid readers over the past 10 years. We're profitable, so that's a success. But a huge part of the population, I don't know how to address. And that's quite new, I think, for us. And I'm sure there is something common on what you are living with the political campaign in the US. Whatever the New York Times is doing a tremendous job. However, a huge part of the population doesn't want to read the New York Times, doesn't trust it. And that's quite new. Institutions are not effective anymore to defend rigorous news.
And turning to you, Anya Schiffrin, is part of the problem also the imbalance in news provision and in information provision? The fact that, credible news organizations, as you mentioned, Louis Dreyfus, like the New York Times, like Le Monde, spend quite a lot of energy and money and resources in producing news. But if you're QAnon, you can produce something that will actually resonate without necessarily having to expand a great deal of resources. And so I'm wondering how we cope with this. And then the second part of my question is, knowing all the effort that you have dedicated to understanding the way in which media platforms and social media platforms like Facebook, Google, etc., how they work, and the need to regulate them. I'd be keen also to know whether you think that they can be regulated, they should be regulated, or whether self-regulation on the part of these platforms is the way to go.
Well, is this working? Yeah, great. I just want to start by saying I loved your historical question because Dr. Andy Tucker from the journalism school actually wrote the book on this subject.
Right.
Andy wrote a
I hope
wonderful
I didn't
book
get it wrong or too
on the
wrong. I probably messed it up.
on the history of fake news. And I'm sure I'm oversimplifying, but I think part of your point was that people often knew those stories were fake and they enjoyed them. It was amusing, right? It was part of what was fun. And I guess what feels scarier today is the anger and the outrage and the fear of violence, right? That's part of what we're worried about. We had a really interesting panel at SIPA yesterday about the elections, and one of the journalists from Hong Kong was talking about all of the fake images that her family and friends in China were sending her, like Trump in the ICU on the verge of death, Trump behind bars. And I'm not sure. I sort of think we're kind of in a post truth world already. I think for a lot of people, maybe it doesn't really matter whether something is true. It just sort of confirms what they think, or it gets them angry, or it gets them excited. And I feel like we really saw that. I feel like on campus during last year, in fact, which is if you thought that the stories about Israeli women being raped weren't true, then you would take another fork in the decision tree. So I think people were acting in a way rationally based on what they thought was true. So that whole worry about kind of polarization and truth, I sort of feel like we're over it. I think we've gone past that. I think people just have very different realities at this point. I'm really happy to talk about regulation, but I'm scared of taking up the entire session. So I don't know if I should talk right now or maybe wait till the
Well,
next round. I don't want to.
You're smarter than me, so you can keep on talking.
maybe if you give us a first inkling of whether, because one of the big issues with as I understand it, with social media platforms is that they claim that they are not content producers, but that they are media platforms, and therefore they should not be regulated. So maybe start with this question. Is this argument legitimate in your view? And if not, why not?
Okay, so maybe my headline is that France is doing everything right.
Okay.
And Alex has been kindly handing out my UNESCO brief on generative AI. But I think everyone who knows me knows I'm pro regulation. I think that too often in the US, people hide behind the First Amendment. And yeah, I definitely sort of am more in the European line that we have to do something. We can't give up completely and say, okay, these are big companies, nothing we can do.
Okay. Duy, there's research that shows, and this is taking a little bit the counterpoint of what we were just saying about disinformation. There's recent research by Andre Pratt from Columbia University and Charles Angelucci of MIT that shows that the vast majority of Americans apparently are able to reliably discern real news stories from fake ones. And what they're arguing is that the bigger threat to democracy is the lack of access to reliable sources of information, reliable news sources. So it's an economic and structural injustice agenda, if you like. Not everyone can afford a $45 a month subscription to the New York Times, and therefore part of the solution, they claim, would be to provide better access to reliable news sources. Is that a view that you share, that you can confirm, or do you think that this is going too far?
No, I mean, it's this working? Yeah. Okay. So I think the key point is it is a problem and it is a potential solution. So there's a few things going on. I think the first thing is that yes, there is this kind of flood of disinformation, right? There's just a fire hose of it, whether it's from organized entities or individuals reposting those thoughts. But I think at the same time, the thing that we also have to talk about is there has been a concerted effort to erode the idea of trust. Trust in institutions, right? There was a time where you might not agree with your government, but there was a trust that the government was doing something, and you may not agree with everything that your newspaper wrote, but there was a trust that there was a truth, and there was a trust that you could send your child to a school and they would be learning the right things, right? So I think a part of that, yes, everything you said is true, but I think the thing we also have to look at, we often look at the flood of disinformation, and even though we can recognize that disinformation is in fact fake, and even though we kind of know that GIF or that meme is fake, there's a reason why we send it back out there, right? And it's because it's kind of one gigantic, if you will, FU to the institutions that we no longer trust, right? We behave in that way because we can't trust those X, Y, and Z. And this was not a passive behavior. This is, I believe, a concerted effort by not great parties in creating this idea that it's fake, but at least it's not that, right? Like at least like that. So it's both of those things. I think the bigger concern going forward is we just, and it's actually that stat is actually troubling. If someone believes something to be fake and they still propagate that, yeah, it's bad that it's fake, but the act of propagating that false narrative or false bit of information is terrifying. Where does that come from? And I think it comes from bad actors really over decades, not just since 2016, eroding our faith in institutions.
Right. And eroding our faith also in the value of truth. I'm just wondering, based on what you both just said, that is it also that there's less of a sanction for telling lies? That if people in authority are telling lies, and we're thinking of politicians, but not just, and they get away with it, then perhaps that erodes the value of truth itself. So, I mean, Louis Dreyfus, what are your thoughts on this, and particularly also on the erosion of authority and the authoritative voice? Why have we lost our faith in the scientific community, what they are actually saying about health issues or the environment? Why are journalists and people in authority generally held in lower regard? Is it because of the way in which they behave, or is it because of something else that is happening in society, that there are other sources of information that we trust better than?
I would say, like Duy was saying, that we are viewed as an institution, and there is right now a violence in the Western society against those institutions. And because we are Le Monde, people want to disagree with us. People prefer other sources of information, but Le Monde, because and it's a symbol of what's going on in our societies, with two camp being spread apart and being more and more violent, and who don't manage to talk to each other anymore. These part of the political parties who want to fight against any institutions, part of our history, part of the governments, and the rest who are institutions. So that's a huge challenge for us. How you can manage to promote your standards, making people pay for journalism, as you were saying, at the same time reach out to this audience who want to fight against the role that you embody. And it has, for me at least, an obvious link to what we are seeing in the political landscape in the US and in France. It's more and more difficult to be an institution in this world, and to defend your values, and to make to build a business model with keeping in mind the general interest, when you have a major part of the population who doesn't want to listen to you or to trust you. And there's the question of building trust in this world of violence, and violence against institutions. It's a real challenge. Yeah.
Right. So part of the issues then would have to do with a new divide that is opening up, not so much between left and right, but perhaps between elite and populists,
Right.
and institutions, as you say, and those who contest the authority and the legitimacy of those institutions. Really interesting. I want to turn to another recent example that we've seen in the news, and perhaps that might be another way of reintroducing the question about regulation of media platforms. So, in August, some of you probably know Pavel Durov, the founder of Telegram, was arrested in France. He was arrested by the French authority. Now, Telegram, I don't know if some of you use it or are familiar with it. It's a little bit of a strange beast, because it's both an instant messaging platform, but it's also a social media platform. So as opposed to, WhatsApp, with which most of you are familiar, where you can only create a group of about 1,000 people, with Telegram you can create a group of 200,000 people. And so that's not a group, that's a platform, that's a social media platform. And so part of the issue there is that Telegram has been, it pretends actually that it encrypts messages, but in order to have your message encrypted, you have to do quite a lot of clicks before you get there. And so it has been used by a lot of criminals in terms of child pornography, in terms of drug trafficking. Telegram has become the operator of choice, as it were. So the French authorities arrest this gentleman, and because he has refused actually to deliver information about his users to the French authorities. And so that really creates, to me, an interesting bind. Where, how far can regulation, and how far can authorities go in actually attempting to regulate or control these social media platforms before they step into the area of denying freedom of expression. And so I'm wondering again, Anya, I mean, first of all, would Pavel Durov been arrested? Would he have been arrested in the US? for having done exactly the same thing?
Oh, I think the answer is probably not. I mean, I'm not a regulator, but think about how we allowed all this cryptocurrency stuff to go on unchecked for so long. I mean, it's interesting because was it a social media platform or was it actually a marketplace for criminals? Right. So, depending on how you look at it, you're going to act in a different way. Personally, I thought it was great that that they arrested him, and I thought it was kind of shocking how long he had eluded the authorities. So I don't think that you just because you circulate poor quality information, you don't get an out by saying, "Well, I'm a journalist and I should enjoy those same protections." Yeah. But I think we're gonna see more of this, right? And I don't know at this point how able governments really are to regulate. Australia is obviously just passing their online harm safety, and so has the UK. But what I'm seeing around the world is governments are scared. They're scared to regulate. And I mean, maybe we'll get more into the whole question of how do we support news.
Mm.
But when Meta left Canada, I mean, left supporting news in Canada, that really scared people. So what I'm hearing in the rest of the world, in Brazil, South Africa, is we can't take this on. They're too powerful. We can't really do anything.
Mm, mm. And do we, I mean, to this point, to Anya's point about supporting news organizations, and you know, supporting the creation and the production of, you know, I want to say reliable news. How do we do it, and what's the responsibility, for example, or the role of a school of journalism like yours?
Well, that's a tough one. So a couple things. I think the first part is what type of journalism are you talking about, right? And so there's this adage where people will hate Congress, but they love their congressman, right? And people will hate the media, but watch their local TV station religiously, right? And so what are you exactly talking about? Is it the New York Times, which in many ways to many people is an institution, where maybe the local television station is my neighbor, right? And so I think we have to talk about that. And the reason I bring that up is because in you know the bad actors are very good at what they do. They're very smart. And the first you know, one of the first waves of the kind of the erosion of journalism was local news, right? You know, we still the entities that are surviving, New York Times, right? The cable outlets, like the big publications. But in most places, there's no longer a local newspaper for hundreds of miles, right?
Mm.
And so that's kind of getting rid of that part of the equation. I hate Congress, but I like my congressman, right? I hate the media, but I like my, well, if you take away the local, then what do I have? I just have the institution I don't like, right? So I think the way that we have to think about it is not a kind of broad stroke, we need to support journalism or media. We have to strategically figure out where it can be most powerful and where we can reconnect to the audiences that have woefully been, you know, left out of the discussion, right? No one begged for their local paper to disappear.
Mm.
In fact, most people would want it back if they could, right? So the role of the journalism school is just that. We're redefining. And admittedly, over the years, if you went to Columbia Journalism, which is right over there, your dream one day after you graduated and you paid your dues was to end up at the New York Times or to work at CNN or to work at Frontline. And then these are all noble pursuits. But you know, under the leadership of Dean Cobb, we're really looking at local and nonprofit news. And our role is to say, actually, wait, if you want a big impact, there's nothing wrong with the New York Times, but how do we fix this problem where you could be a direct, your journalism can be a direct impact to this local community? So I think that's, I'm sorry, that's a very long-winded answer, but I think the problem starts with local, because that, for many reasons, was the first target
Right.
of to eliminate journalism. That was not by accident. That was not by accident. And so when in many communities, they've been successful at doing that, and look at where we are. Completely reasonable people based on that study that understand what's right or wrong, are suddenly reposting complete nonsense.
Right.
So that's where we are, right?
Right. On the issue, for example, of Springfield, and you know, I don't want to you know, sort of overstretch it, but it was, you know, pretty shocking the way in which you know, the sort of completely absurd idea spread around the Haitian community. Would your argument be that had there been local news in Springfield and in other cities in the United States, that might, maybe that would still have happened, but it wouldn't have had the same effect on mentalities?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, because again, like I said, the bad actors are really good, and where we are, it's hard to tell where we can go back to.
Yeah.
But I think in that moment, the only institutions that were speaking out about that were literally Republican politicians saying this doesn't happen here. And even Republican politicians saying that was not enough for the public. They're like, oh no, it's still happening. And then you saw a lot of violence, right? So I don't know if the answer is that, but I would imagine it would have been better.
Right.
And again, it goes back to the trust in institutions. The fact that your local rep is saying, no, this is not true, and there's even a hint of doubt, we've gone a long, bad way away from where we used to be. And so that's I don't know the answer, but I think it might be a direction to go to.
Right. Anya, go ahead.
Didn't I just read that the mayor of Springfield is voting for Trump? I think I read that in the New York Times. Yes, I know. Remarkable. But what I was going to say was Trump was speaking to a national audience. So even if people locally knew that dogs weren't being eaten, but it was the national audience. And I don't know whether the local news would have reached the national
Would have
audience.
had, yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I think I had more to say, but maybe Louis, you were going to say something?
Not on Springfield.
So,
want to mention on local news is that there's been so much effort in the US to fund local journalism, and there's been such a movement to galvanize local foundations to pay for it. And Ryan over here works with a lot of the digital startups in Europe. And I was on the board of Open Society Foundation for 16 years, and we supported a lot of the little outlets. And I think it was a really important thing to do. But I also think, in a way, Google News Initiative supported them, and then there were more than the market could bear. So I think that's a real problem. If you start setting up a lot of local things and then they can't compete with each other, and I think, or they do compete with each other, there's enough revenue. So I still think that large institutions are incredibly important as well. And I'm not sure the little ones are going to save democracy. Whereas I think the big public broadcasters, I think there's a role, the Le Mondes of this world, I think there's a really an important role for them to play.
Absolutely. And I think yeah, I didn't want to frame it like that, but I think the important thing is that, yeah, those are great institutions, but I think having the whole process of being able to trust an institution again is so vital. There are institutions we should not trust, 100%, right? But when you cannot trust, your local news, when you can't trust your local school board, when you can't trust those things, I think it won't save democracy, but maybe it will save trust that will eventually result in a different way of viewing democracy.
Yes, and speaking of the non-profit initiative, the difficulty you have, speaking of trust, is somebody is paying for it, right?
Yeah.
And so they will have this question is, who is paying for it and why is he paying for it? When you are in a for-profit organization like Le Monde, we have 77% of our revenues coming from the readers. I know who is paying for my business model, that's the readers, but it works because I'm big enough. But for those small media or even major media with an oligarch owning their shares, even if the shareholders has a clear view on the independence of the media, for most of the public, it's a sign of dependency. And it's not possible to trust the media owned by somebody who is so rich. That's why, for example, at Le Monde, we were partly owned by Xavier Niel, a telecom mogul, and he sold for €1 his shares in Le Monde to a non-profit, just to show that it is not for his own profit that he was owning Le Monde, but to rely only on non-profit, it's very, very risky. To turn over Le Monde, we needed to get 130 million euros, and obviously a non-profit would have given us this amount. So it's not that obvious. And I think it would be very naive to believe that the future in journalism of mass media will depend only on non-profit organizations.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I mean, I'm thank you for bringing up the economic issue, because I'm wondering the extent to which the trend in France now, with a number of big business people buying up media organizations, what kind of impact is it having on the whole of the media landscape? So you've made a very good point about independence and the need for independent media, but then the general atmosphere of watching, well, I won't mention a specific news channel, but you know exactly what I mean. And we in the Anglo-Saxon world, or so-called Anglo-Saxon world, are familiar with this, with the effect also that Rupert Murdoch, for example, has had on different media networks. So is the effect of these large economic business interests that have very, very strong political position, is the effect of them entering into the media world a shrinking and a polarization of opinion, or is it something else?
No, it's not something else. It's obviously when somebody is investing in a company, he do that for a certain purpose. So it's either to make a profit and to get dividends, and or because he will he will find another type of advantage. More and more people in the Western world are investing in media to get influence. So that's no wonder that people are distrusting our media more and more, since
Right.
they think that the shareholders are investing for the wrong reasons. So it's very difficult to solve this issue, meaning we need more and more investment to do quality journalism. In 10 years at Le Monde, we doubled the number of staff journalists. It is very costly. But at the same time, I want to be more and more independent, and I want to show to the public that I am more and more independent. So I change the status of company. I show that there is no voting rights for those shareholders. It's difficult, but if you don't have these values in your DNA, that you are independent and you call yourself the reference newspaper, you want to be at the level of this ambition. But otherwise, it's impossible to get this kind of finance without being dependent on your shareholders, and that's what's going on in France.
Yeah.
You have few media that are now owned by a foundation. You have Ouest France, the largest regional newspaper. You have Mediapart, digital only, and now there's Le Monde. The rest have trouble finding investors, and the investors that are coming, you were mentioning
Journal du
TV,
Dimanche,
Journal du Dimanche, TV channel
BFM.
BFM, or Europe number one. It's very difficult, and those media correspond exactly of what the public is accusing us. It's being there to influence our opinion rather than to explain what is the world we are living in.
Yeah. I'd like to, this is really illuminating. I'd like to turn maybe to some solutions before opening the floor to questions. So maybe one more perhaps insights from all of you. Over the last 15, 20 years, media literacy education has become really, really significant. I mean, it has very old roots, and maybe, Anya, you can tell us a little bit about those roots at Columbia University. But maybe starting with you, Duy, being, at a journalism school, how important is media literacy education? How do you view it in terms of your students, and how do you view it as something that goes beyond into the community to, how can media literacy make us all, more discerning media consumers?
Yeah, so traditionally, and when I mean traditionally, the last 113 years, the journalism school has trained ostensibly, for the most part, people who want to be working journalists, right? It's a professional program. You come in, you learn reporting, you learn maybe podcasting, whatever the case may be, right? And we're actually in a stage of reflection now at the school. And what that means, what I mean by that is, what is the value of our degree? We're going through that. We're going through that in the same way that media companies are struggling with maybe page views or subscriptions. We're struggling with people saying, why would I want to learn journalism? Right? What? Like, I'm not like, what? And then we have to respond to that, right? Why would you spend, and newsflash, Columbia isn't the cheapest place to go, right? So it's an investment to go. So why would you want to do that? And we've had to reflect, and not in a marketing way, and not in an advertising way. And we've sat around, and the good thing about the journalism school, I'm surrounded by very smart people, and we sit around and we talk about this. I think the value of journalism are the methods of journalism, which is finding information, verifying information, contextualizing information cogently and quickly, right? That is a skill set that is invaluable everywhere, in every industry, in every discipline, right? So I think, and I know you're calling media literacy, but I'm more like journalism methods. That is what we would talk about. So I think when we think about the value of the journalism education, I think we're at a place where, I don't think we would have said this 10 years ago, we're at a place of, we want to export our methods to people who may not want to be journalists. Sacrilege. That would have been crazy talk 10 years ago, right? But if you, again, finding information, verifying information, right? Contextualizing, all those things I listed, if we can export that to a population that may never become a journalist, they might be an analyst, they might be a lawyer, they might be whatever. I think society and the greater good might develop skills where they can build that trust again, where they can discern, maybe I can trust that organization over that organization, or that institution over that institution. And so this is a really long-winded way of saying we find it profoundly important, but maybe not just for journalists. And that's an interesting thing for us right now.
Right. Anya.
Is a little bit, when I started running the TMAC program at SEPA, I thought, maybe this is too insidery, but we're on campus, so why not? One of the things I wanted to do was make sure we weren't doing what you were doing. And so that was what we started to do. Like, how do you cover or think about writing about economics or writing about international affairs when you are not going to be a journalist? And how do you communicate? I went to a media literacy research symposium this summer because I just wanted to learn a bit more about that profession or that field. And it was so interesting because they said whenever there's a problem, people turn to them to sort of fix it, right? Everybody just says, oh, media literacy.
Right.
And some of them really do believe they can solve all these problems of trust that we're talking about, and some of them really don't. Is this? Can I talk about Clyde Miller? You gave me
Well,
an opening.
yes, please do.
Thank
Please
you.
do, because media literacy has roots here.
So in the pandemic, and Andy has been very tolerant of me discussing this, I got sort of obsessed with possibly the first person in the United States to teach media literacy. And his name was Clyde Miller, and he was at Columbia University Teachers College. And part of Andy's taught a lot about how when new technologies emerge, people get scared and they try to sort of think about, what do we do? There's too much information. People can't process it. And so Clyde Miller raised a little money from a philanthropist and started the Institute for Propaganda Analysis at Columbia's Teachers College. And they did everything that is still done today. They had emojis, they analyzed text, they did a newsletter for school teachers, they did little quizzes and discussion questions. They took a big topic each month, and they analyzed it, including, by the way, a sort of a QAnon fantasy that was circulating in the 1930s and disinformation about immigrants. And they sort of said, this is both sides, these are questions. Anyway, long story short, just like today, they branched into anti-racist education. Because in the 1930s, the view was, what is the worst form of propaganda there is? It's racism. So there were pilot programs all over the US and in Canada to teach students that, blacks and Muslims and Jews are just as good as everybody else. Remember, this was the context of Hitler and post World War I. Anyway, long story short, they were basically viewed as too left wing, and they were fired by the right wing dean of Teachers College. And in the archives in the library, I found letters from Clyde Miller begging to keep his apartment on Morningside Drive.
Right.
I immediately photocopied and sent to John Coatsworth and Lee Bollinger. I was like, nothing has changed in 100 years.
Right.
So anyway, I've written so much about him for Columbia Journalism Review and long academic papers. And then I found one of our students found his family in Melbourne in Australia. I went to see them. We're actually having a conference on him on November 15th. So if anyone shares my passion, get in touch. But comparing the backlash, because today teaching media literacy, as you know, has become totally polarized. It's almost impossible to get new media literacy regulation through some of the red states, just like 1930s.
Sorry, can I jump in 1 second? I'm sorry, Louis. I want to hear from you.
Yeah.
That the fact that the term media literacy, like so many words now, are I think so ineffective. So I'm a climate reporter. When I go out there, I never introduce myself as a climate reporter. In fact, I never introduce myself as a journalist. It's like I'm doing a film about coastal erosion, right? Which is all those things at once, right? And so that's why when you were asking me, I won't talk like the journalism school will never teach media literacy because it's weighted, right? But I don't think it's as controversial to teach reporting methods, right? Finding information, that's not very controversial, right? Yeah. Right? Yeah, right. It could be. You're right. So I think those words are really matter, and I just wanted to highlight that. Yeah.
Louis Dreyfus, curious about, because we're talking about an American context of media literacy education. I mean, is this a practice in France? Does it happen? Does it happen in schools? And then I know that you're very keen also on reaching out to the younger generations, as Le Monde, a very august institution. How do you do that? And how do you make sure that the next generation is really enrolled in reading serious newspapers?
In terms of media literacy, we have stopped relying on the education system. The French teachers don't have enough hours to teach media literacy. That's so every time there's a public group asking for the education system to explain what is fake news, what are fake news, what are quality news, I think it's hopeless. The teachers don't have the time. So it's part of our job, part of the mission is to talk to the younger generation. So we do that because it's because the public system cannot do it, and obviously also to reach this audience at an early stage before they stop welcoming quality news. So we have investing heavily on Snapchat, on TikTok, and on YouTube with young journalists, motion designers explaining what are the news and trying to give a context. And I remember a few months ago, I went to see a member of the French government saying we need subsidies to do that more and more. And they told me, Louis, we are against the platform. I say, oh, well, yes, but this generation are looking for news on those platforms. So we, as a legacy media, need to be more present on those platforms to talk to this audience. And then year after year, bringing them back either to the print or the web, onto the app, but we need to talk to them and to be able to invest on those platforms with real journalists doing real news is the best we can do in terms of media literacy.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I'd like to open the floor to questions. I see that we'll have a roving microphone. Thank you.
Hello.
Please state your name and affiliation if you wish.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Stephanie, and thank you so much for the panel. I had a question about the value of journalism. You mentioned earlier that finding information, verifying information is where the value of journalism lies. And I would like to know if this is flexible based on location. For example, if you are in an autocracy, how does that change? Specifically, living here in the United States, I'm West African. Um, I do not consume social media at all because I am very much more aware of the negative effect that it has on me, the false information that I get mostly from social media, versus when I'm in a West African country that's an autocracy, where the news, quote unquote, is controlled by the autocracy. And the only way to actually have proper information is to be on social media and to get it from people. So then for me, the question is what is really the definition of the news? Is this something that changes based on location, how you research it? Is disinformation flexible? How do you regulate? Because in an autocracy, regulation is another form of autocracy. It's a way of shutting people down.
Yep.
Where in the context of the US, we need regulation to get access to proper information. Sorry for the long-winded question. Thank you.
Thank you. Who wants to take this?
I think I'll speak to the part I know best, and I think maybe you folks will speak to the other part. So the part I know, but there's two sides of journalism. There's the methods and the creation of journalism. Everything I listed, I think that doesn't change from where you go around the world. The other side, the laws, the distribution, the business models, the market, that's going to be relative to wherever you are, right? There's different rules and regulations everywhere. So I'll speak to the first part. No, I mean, like good journalism, at least as we define it, in our curriculum, and I think most journalists would agree, is like those things. You are a referee in many ways, right? And what I mean by that is if you watch so you're French, so I'll say soccer, right? You watch a soccer match, right? You don't call 5 fouls on both sides. You call the fouls when they come. And that is the role of a journalist, right? And that's why the whole balance thing is weird, right? So I can speak to that. I think those rules are a bit universal. Now, when you go to who's allowed to practice journalism, who distributes journalism, the rules and regulations, these are the experts over here. That's a totally different thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think you actually put your finger on it. I mean, Ryan and I did a report together years ago on journalism around the world and startups, and very much what we found were that in autocracies, in closed societies, credible information was much more valuable because it was so scarce. Now, it's obviously very difficult to produce in these places. And it also speaks to the importance of things like the BBC or AFP, because very often, as you know, in closed societies, you can only get the information from overseas. And I would say that in terms of regulation, this is part of why there's a reluctance to regulate in some places, because there's this terrible fear that it's going to be misused. And I think that the tech companies have done a really, really good job of using that to avoid regulation. And, I used to live in Hanoi, and I always said, Vietnam knew how to control the media. They really didn't need the Digital Services Act to learn how to do that. And if Europe feels safe enough to regulate, then I think they need to do it. I don't think they can say, well, it might get misused by some dictatorship that's already repressing journalists. But you can certainly make the argument that when the Europeans are designing the regulations, they should think about how it's misused.
Any other questions?
Yes, hello. I'm Sirin Keida. I am a PhD in political science at Columbia. First, thank you for the panel. I think you captured one of the questions that I think you captured really well, is the fact that the owners of the media are more and more um, personalities of the world of business, is putting into question like their reliability, right? Um, And so the thing is, the media usually goes behind closed doors. And what is happening behind the closed doors of a media owned by someone from the world of affairs is actually a question that I would like to ask you. And I think, like, it would be like it would be great if maybe Mr. Dreyfus, you could like answer that question even more so, as I believe there's unclarity regarding the independent fund that's behind Le Monde. Actually, I believe it's a little bit like, from what I've heard, it's a little bit in between the Patrick Drahi's fund and the Mediapart's fund, in the sense that Xavier Niel is still like the sole founder of that fund. And so I'm actually wondering, like, how does it really impact your life as a journalist? Like, what would how like did that really change, or is the threat still there, and how does the threat manifests in the journal?
Thank you for the question. So if I take Le Monde, Le Monde is owned at 72% by a foundation. Okay. This foundation in France is not owned by anybody because it's a foundation of general interest. It can only finance general interest mission. So this foundation is not allowed to give any funding to Le Monde. Its foundation, this foundation owns 70% of the share and is not allowed to sell the share unless the journalists agree. And to make sure there is a full transparency of the governance of this foundation, we have a journalist within the board. There is 6 board members. So it was the only way we found to show that we were not owned by an oligarch, but obviously somebody needed to create this foundation because you need a founder. But this founder cannot intervene in the editorial or in the governance of the group because the foundation is not allowed. The foundation will promote, will finance initiative to defend other media, not Le Monde. So that's the only. But we know for a fact that every time there is an owner, there is this disbelief that an owner can own share in a newspaper without intervening. So part of our job with the executive editor, Jérôme Finoglio, and myself, it's every year to show new proofs of independency in changing the structure of the company, in giving new rights to journalists. But the shareholders now have no way to intervene. The only way they can intervene is every 6 years they can name the executive editor. Okay. But to name somebody and to appoint somebody, they need 60% of the editors of Le Monde to agree on the choice. And if they want, and last year we promote a new rule, if they want to fire the editor-in-chief, they need 60% of the editors to vote in favor of the departure of the editor-in-chief. So when you are appointed editor-in-chief, that means you have the confidence of huge majority of the staff.
Like the impeachment process in
Exactly,
the United
yeah.
States. Yeah. Okay.
In short, you put in this new structure to protect the editorial independence of Le Monde. No?
I think it was, we are trying to react every time there is a change in the French media landscape. 18 months ago, the owner of Les Echos has decided to lay off the editor-in-chief of Les Echos for some reasons. We say, okay, and the reason was probably editorial. So we say, it's not happening at Le Monde, but we need to make sure it cannot happen at Le Monde. 5 years ago, a Czech oligarch, Daniel Kretinsky, tried to do a takeover at Le Monde. Okay, he didn't manage. We refused his offer. We changed the statute of the company, but we say, and we had a movement within the editorial staff, within the direction, since the executive editor and myself refused to meet the oligarch. Say he's not. We are not comfortable with his intentions, so we don't want him at the board. So we decided to change the structure and to create this foundation to make sure that this very special asset, meaning Le Monde, wouldn't be sellable. So the editorial staff was already very independent and very protected. But every time something happened within the media landscape, we're trying to react and to build another level of protection.
Thank you. The gentleman in the blue shirt.
Hi, Mr. Dreyfus, a quick question. You mentioned earlier that there is a broad swath of audiences in France that don't agree with Le Monde, and these are those you're unable to target. What are some of the maybe product or audience strategies you have in the pipeline to potentially address that audience? Any reforms internally you're thinking about? Could be editorial also. And then maybe for the rest of the panel, you know, on disinformation, I guess that, you know, debunking and fact checking is only, you know, achieving so much in terms of, you know, shaping opinions subsequently. It's and regulation doesn't seem to be on the horizon. Can you help me out? Think like what framework there might be for thinking about what's next with disinformation? I just feel like with a lot of these conversations, we end up at a roadblock. There's not a lot of answers. If either of those two options tend not to be an available solution. Just curious if you have any thinking around that. Anyone on the panel?
For my part, these two answers. I've given up the ambition of making the people who don't trust Le Monde trusting Le Monde. They are adamant in distrusting Le Monde, and I have to live with that. My first goal is to talk to the new generation. So we are investing heavily on those platforms. We're making sure it's reliable news. It's often on video. But if I can manage to talk to this new generation, on Snap, I have 1,500,000 subscribers or followers on Snapchat that are reading on a daily basis my edition. If I can keep, let's say, 10% of this audience in the next 5 years, I will manage to grow the audience and change a part of the French population. So we're investing on the new generation. That's the only thing I can do. In the meantime, what we're trying to do also is to better address topics that were not that important at Le Monde and that people are asking for. It could be on environment, but it could be also on personal stories and or personal life. And we saw after COVID those two topics surging in terms of interest among our readers or general interests. So we are investing in those topics, and we saw on digital. Obviously, you can see what people read, and the people who start at Le Monde reading a story on how I'm getting old in France. We saw them then reading something on French politics, then reading something on Israel, then something on economics. So it's we're trying to open new ways to enter Le Monde world, and then we know we can keep those readers.
The second part of the question.
Oh, yeah. So thanks for giving me the opening. My spring class is called Solutions for Online Mis and Disinformation.
Right.
And we started a working group on this topic at Columbia, cross-disciplinary, in 2017. So I ended up doing my PhD on the subject. So I think it's like many problems, one of those things where it's going to be a whole lot of solutions. And what I teach each week is a different one. I start with the demand side, which is sort of the American way. You know, it's your fault. Don't be an idiot. Don't forward. So things like media literacy, building trust in news. And then I go to the supply side, and the supply side can either be blocking the bad stuff through regulation or through downright censorship, or creating more of the good stuff by supporting journalism. So I don't think one single thing is going to solve anything in different countries. It's sort of a menu, in different countries and different societies are sort of choosing the mix that they want. So that's where we're at, I think.
Yeah, if I could just add to that one quick thought on that. I think Anya is absolutely right. It's not, believe me, as a journalism professor, I've sat on too many future of disinformation panels, right? And I think the answer is yes, everything they're doing is 100%, but also it's this idea of trust in institutions. I read a study or saw a study the other day where people trust brands more than their local newspaper. I'm like, are you kidding me? They're trusting a brand, right? The world is upside down. So until we solve that, I think it becomes quite impossible to solve other things. It's kind of like when you have like a pain in your back and your doctor said it's actually your heel that's causing it, right? Like treat the thing in the heel and the back will fix. I think there's a bit of that. And it's not an either or. It's all these things, but that idea that we're in a place where you're going to trust, I don't know, Coca-Cola over whatever, right? It just blows my mind. So until we treat that, you're not going to have that answer that you want, I think. Yeah.
I was on a call yesterday where somebody pulled out some survey data that people trust generative AI now more than anything else. And I was so blown away by that. But yeah, I agree with you totally. I mean, journalists always think the solution to every problem is more journalism. And I was at a meeting recently, I can't remember, I think it was an economist, and I told her, journalists totally think they're responsible for Trump and Modi, and they really think it's all because they didn't do their jobs properly, and there should be more good journalism. And this, economist was appalled. She was like, "No, really? You've all been worrying about that for years?" And when I left the meeting, she was like, "Tell them not to worry. It's not their fault."
Right.
We spent years worrying about this, right?
Right.
We do think it's our fault.
We had a question at the back, I think.
Yeah.
Yep.
So first of all, thank you all for coming. Especially you, Monsieur Dreyfus. I imagine that this was a very long journey for you, from France to les États-Unis. So thank you for the panel. This has been a really, really interesting evening for me, especially coming in.
You speak up just a little bit because we
sorry.
can't hear you. I'm
Especially
sorry.
as a historian, that's what my own background is from. And I was interested because you all have mentioned a lot the idea of distrust in the media. I realize that what I'm about to ask is kind of a big topic right now, but what do you think, if you wouldn't all mind answering this question, what do you all think might be at the root of that distrust? Because I think that it's across the political spectrum. I think I'm seeing it on the right wing as well as in the left wing, just as a young person today. I've seen it just manifest in so many different forms, just distrust, not just of the media, but of traditional institutions, traditional government, traditional forms of authority. So what do you think might be at the root of that distrust? Thank you very much.
Difficult question. I would say that years after years, institutions have lost contact with their constituencies. It's true for the politician. It's true for the media. Media, where you were talking with your readers, it was top down. Meaning, if you were a reader of Le Monde or New York Times, you can send a letter. We were publishing the letter or not. We were answering to the letter or not. And after time, it was a huge gap between our constituents, our readers, and the editorial staff. And we let that happen for too many years. And now we are trying to reach out to them, but we are very, very far away. So we are managing, we open article to comments, for example. Okay, and at the beginning it was tough for the journalists because the journalist was doing a story on a topic, and the readers below the stories on the digital were saying, "I completely disagree," and say, "Well," and they were telling me, "Louis, you cannot let them talk." I said, "Yes, we need to let them talk, but it's at a certain time, a part of the population in the Western world feel in complete disarray and feel that those institutions have given up their role to improve the quality of life of everybody. So now there is a backlash, and each of us in the political world, in the economic world, in the academic world, I believe, but also on the media world, need to find new answers. But that's a backlash, and probably we deserve it. And as Anya was saying, probably journalists have a small but real responsibility in the surge of Trump. Otherwise, it would be we were not clear enough of who he was, who he is, what he was wanted to do. So obviously, we have a huge responsibility for that.
So I don't know what the cause, but I know it's not accidental. You know, I'm a part of a few institutions, the institution of journalism, but also one of the great privileges of my life has been an educator at this university. And if you haven't seen the headlines, there's a lot of sudden mistrust in not just this university, but higher education. And that's not an accident, right? And you'll see congressional hearings that lead to a mistrust in, right? So I don't know what the cause is, but it's not accidental. But the good thing of knowing that something's not accidental, at least we can start identifying it, right? If we haven't identified it yet. So that's the key thing for me. It's like, and again, sound like a broken record. It's a bunch of things that have been fractured that lead us to where we are, where it's so easy for someone to manipulate us, even though we know we're being manipulated, right? How many times have we said, oh, this is so stupid, I'm going to hit share anyways, right? And so smart people figure out who the bad people are. And we got to take them out. That's the, yeah.
Anya, anything to?
Mm-hmm. Hi. Oh,
yeah.
Hi. Can y'all hear me? Okay. Hi, I'm Matt. Thank you all for your time and insight. The long and short of my question before I get into like a little bit of rambling is, what would meaningful regulation of these big tech companies look like if it's possible? Really interested in this because of this idea of the First Amendment and hiding behind the First Amendment and post-truth, in that the First Amendment, most amendments in law, like, assumes collective truth and collective reality, and if that's just not the case anymore, and the First Amendment, which is hidden behind, kind of becomes not only like toothless but also like insufficient in addressing these kinds of issues. So in that sense, is regulation possible within the kind of like existing framework of the First Amendment? And if not, does then there need to be kind of a more drastic change in I don't know, structures, if essentially like any sort of regulation has to be within the framework of the First Amendment that's, you know, kind of toothless?
Yeah.
So I do think in the US it's going to be very difficult to have regulation. I think there's a few kind of entry points. So one is children. So a lot of countries have been able to pass bills to protect children. And I think that from harmful content. So what, you know, one path is you sort of identify harms and then you sort of nudge the platforms to do something about it. So the Digital Services Act says you have to assess your risk and you have to show that you have a plan to deal with that risk. and then we're going to audit you to check up on it. So I think those are kind of, realistic ways of regulating. I think the implementation, obviously we have Europeans in the room and we probably have lawyers in the room. So I think obviously there's a lot of questions in Europe about how that will be implemented. There aren't enough regulators. Different countries are going to move at different places, but that's a sort of basic thing. I mean, frankly, I think it might be a job opportunity for our students because somebody's going to have to hire all these people and train them up. And then just clever things like we were just at this conference in Australia and Audrey Tang was there from Taiwan. And one of the Australian zillionaires, Twiggy, because everybody in Australia has a nickname, his false images of him have been used to scam people. And so people have lost a lot of money. And Audrey Tang was explaining that in Taiwan, they made a rule that if you're a public person and your image is used for some kind of financial something, you have to sign and agree to it. And if not, and somebody gets scammed, Meta has to pay the damages. So those kinds of things where you start saying there's going to be fines or liability can push the platforms to hire more content moderators, which I know you're doing a great paper on those working conditions of some, not the moderators, but the other people. So maybe that's not the solution, but I think there's a lot of like nudging that can be done. Yeah.
Good evening. Thank you to organize this evening, this debate, very interesting debate. Thank you to the Alliance Program and the Maison Française de Columbia. My name is Thomas Clare. I am currently in the law school as a visiting professor here in this university, but I am generally in the Sorbonne University as a law professor. Yes, but I am actually a reader. I have been reading Le Monde for more or less 40 years, every day. I am also following Snapchat on Instagram, even if I am not the young generation, I'm sorry. And I am coming from a family of journalists on the group Le Monde. When I am reading Le Monde or Le Press or here now the New York Times, I am looking for the truth. I am looking for a true information. Very important for me to have a true information. And now I am here for 2 months, and I am following very carefully the campaign for the next election. Would be in just 2 weeks, the next 2 weeks. My question is a provocative question, of course. Do you think that the majority of the American people are looking for the truth? Are looking for the truth? My impression now is the truth is not the main goal of the campaign. And I want to take 3 examples. First, the candidates are programmed with many depends. There are not serious economic program even for United States. Nobody is challenging the program. The data, the only data important in the program, in the campaign, is the data for the dollars raised in the campaign. Secondly, the truth of the facts are not a question. During the debate, we have the Springfield issue. So, and we remember only this fact of the debate of the 10th September. And thirdly, the truth of the arguments are also an interesting issue. And I was really surprised during the debate of the 10th September that the 2 candidates cannot interrupt the other candidate when he was saying false information. So that means the truth cannot emerge by a confrontation of the arguments by the 2 candidates, because each candidate has a time to develop whatever he think about the program. So my provocative question for the American people here is, do you think that not all of us in this room now, but if the majority of the American people are following to have a true information, or they prefer to have a show for the campaign?
So provocative. Yeah, so I think humans inherently want the truth because the truth benefits them. So what's a better school? This school is better than that school. I'm going to send my children there. You know, this is going to, doing this will earn me more money than that, right? Or this person is not a crook and that person is a crook. I think in general, at the most basic level, humans want the truth, right? The form of the truth, the form, what form that comes in is now in debate, is in question, right? And for journalists, many years, we admittedly thought we were the gatekeepers of the truth. That thing that was a newspaper or that thing that was a television show or that thing was a back documentary, that was the truth and we were the gatekeepers of the truth and you trust us because we're trustworthy and we have good faces and all that kind of thing, right? So I think there's two parts to the idea. To answer your question, I think people do want the truth, but in question is how they're going to get it is what I, every day as a journalism instructor, are talking about it. And at the most basic level, we have things like Snapchat and we have the platforms, right? That's one version. But I think the young people or most people, I don't think anyone in the morning grabs their phone and goes, I want some truth, right? Right? Like, I don't think most people are, I want some journalism. I don't think most people do that. They're getting the information coming at them, right? Wouldn't you agree, most people? Unless, maybe I'm wrong, I don't think. But what I'm saying there is that there's I think inherently people want it, people need it. It's self-preserving to have truth, but at the same time, who delivers it and who do I trust is what we're struggling with right now. Yeah.
Anything to add? Or
what strikes me in this political campaign, what I have read, is I have a feeling that each of the camp have a marketing strategy for every part of the constituents. So people don't want to have a global project, and they want to understand what the candidate is offering them. And it's very difficult for the media to work on the coherence of the system of the campaign because nobody wants to read that. They want to know what is in for me. And so this inflation of proposals that are incoherent, that are not financed, but people, and that's it's a major change in our Western societies. It's very difficult to speak about general interest. People want to have to understand what you are offering them, not to their neighbors, just to them, and they will vote according to their particular interest, not the general interest. And in this case, it's very difficult and very deceptive, probably disappointing, probably for you to follow the campaign because it's very difficult to write on the campaign and to have the readers following that. Yeah.
okay, this is all we have the time for. I'd like to thank our panel and please thank them with me. You've given us a lot to think about. Thank you.